Hi friends, here are the top 10 anti-inflammatory grains to replace rice. Number 10 is an ancient grain dating back thousands of years in the Andes. Today people eat this grain because of its high protein, 8 grams per cup, and it is known to be a complete protein. A food is considered a complete protein if it has all 9 essential amino acids that your body cannot make. This idea is partially correct because you do need to eat the 9 essential amino acids, but in reality, all plants are complete in protein and have all the amino acids that your body needs. Every plant just has different proportions of the amino acids, just like our body also needs different proportions of amino acids. This is why it's good to mix and match your plant food groups. For example, beans are lower in methionine and grains are lower in lysine. So when you eat beans and grains together, they complement each other. But you don't have to worry about complementing amino acids when you eat food, as the average American eats twice as much protein than you need. So don't focus on complementing amino acids. Just focus on quality food. And by the way, just like rice, all grains should be rinsed prior to cooking to remove dirt and mold. Basically, mold naturally exists in the environment and collects on everything. Grains can also have mycotoxins, such as aflatoxin, that is known to cause liver cancer. This is why I try to buy all my grains grown within the United States. The first grain that we're talking about is also high in magnesium, iron, zinc, and vitamin E, and it's been shown to reduce blood vessel inflammation by lowering triglycerides. I eat this particular grain at least once a week and find it easier to cook than rice. However, there is a toxin on this grain called saponins that make the grain bitter. And if you guessed quinoa, you would be correct. Quinoa is easier to cook than rice. I usually boil some water, maybe 3 times as much water as the amount of quinoa I want to cook. After the water boils, I throw in the pre-washed quinoa, put the lid back on, and let it boil again. At that point, I remove the lid and let the water boil off. I prefer to eat it plain and to add the quinoa to my salads or eat it like rice. I like to buy red quinoa because I'm always looking for more pigment in my food, as that red or purple color means extra antioxidants and extra power to reduce inflammation. And some of you may believe all grains are inflammatory, but that's not what the science shows. However, each of us are unique. Some people are allergic to specific proteins like gluten in wheat, barley, and rye. However, all foods, especially grains, can be manipulated to be inflammatory to everyone by processing them. And to keep its anti-inflammatory power, it's important to eat the whole grain with fiber and all the phytonutrients. And you may want to replace rice because of its high arsenic or because it raises your blood sugar due to its high starch and low protein. And this is especially worse with white short grain rice that has the fiber casing stripped. Either way, diversification is a key to health to reduce the buildup of a single toxin and to increase anti-inflammatory nutrients. Number 9 is another great grain people reserve for breakfast. I'm not sure why. I think good food can be eaten any time of day. And this grain is super easy and convenient. Once I soaked it in plant milk and left it in the refrigerator overnight. I have also tried boiling, microwaving, and baking it whole. They are all delicious ways to cook this grain. And if you guess oats, you are correct. I'm sure you heard oats reduce blood vessel inflammation by reducing your cholesterol. And that's because it's high in soluble fiber. Soluble fiber gels together and blocks the binding in cholesterol and blocks you from reabsorbing your own bile acids, which is basically made out of cholesterol. But if you really want to lose weight, I would prefer you eat oat groats, which will also prevent you from being hungry and prevent these rapid sugar spikes from just eating simple carbs. Overnight oats are popular since a cold can turn the oat starches into more resistant starches that are not absorbable and further reduce sugar and insulin spikes. Number 8 is a grain that is underappreciated, and although America is the #1 producer in the world, I don't usually see this grain on the store shelves unless it is in a gluten-free product. Now, this gluten-free grain has 20% lower blood sugar compared to wheat and has more anti-inflammatory nutrients than wheat, and it's called sorghum. Sorghum has the lowest amount of starch digestibility amongst all the edible grains, which translates into lower blood sugar. In addition, sorghum sorghum has been used in traditional medicine in developing countries to treat diseases due to its high content of antioxidants, polyphenols, and proteins that are apparently antiviral. I personally eat red sorghum because the color tells me it has more anti-inflammatory power. I caution you about gluten-free products. They're usually made out of highly refined flour. If you are concerned about gaining weight or trying to lose weight, then you may want to consider giving up flour or going gluten-free even if you don't have a gluten allergy or a gluten intolerance. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye, and people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity can have a myriad of GI symptoms when they eat gluten-containing grains or food contaminated with gluten. And these symptoms can include diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, and even constipation. Ironically, there's a bunch of people with no symptoms, but they actually have celiac disease, and if they don't get tested, they will eventually have symptoms if they eat gluten. If you have these symptoms, please see a doctor. A simple blood test called tissue transglutaminase IgA antibody is very sensitive for celiac disease. Now, you can also have allergies to other wheat proteins, such as albumin, globulins, and gliadins. And some people can get a skin rash called dermatitis herpetiformis from eating wheat. Now, people with eczema and asthma are definitely more prone to food allergies. A daily food diary is super helpful to help you figure out what your body can or cannot tolerate. Now, beware, your body cannot store much carbohydrates, and if you don't use the carbohydrates you eat through physical activity, it gets packed on as fat, first in the liver and then in the muscle, and then it spills over to fat tissue. And as I mentioned earlier, consider incorporating some gluten-free days in a week to improve your weight and reduce your risk of getting type 2 diabetes, which is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. And the symptoms only show up when you eat carbohydrates. It's like people with nut allergies. If you have nut allergies, you may be avoiding nuts so that you don't have symptoms. But that doesn't mean you are not allergic to nuts. Now, people who are really allergic to nuts can have a life-threatening allergic reaction called anaphylaxis and need to always carry an epinephrine pen around. Those with nut allergies sometimes have invisible symptoms. They may feel tingling in their mouth. And then as the allergy gets more severe, they may have visible swollen lips. The invisible symptoms of carbohydrate intolerance begins as fatty liver and high insulin, and then progresses to visible signs of high blood sugars and obesity. Any diet that removes processed foods will improve these symptoms of carbohydrate intolerance and help you lose weight, reduce blood sugars, and reduce fat in your liver. Therefore, people who go on a gluten-free diet will have a lower risk of type 2 diabetes because most of our processed foods are made from processed wheat. And then they add sugar. So if you don't eat carbohydrates, does that mean you have reverse insulin resistance and fix the carbohydrate tolerance problem? The only way to know is if you challenge your body with glucose. And this is why the glucose tolerance test is the gold standard to diagnose diabetes in pregnant women, because the stakes are high if we miss diabetes. Pregnant moms have a higher risk of miscarriage. Their babies can get hypoglycemia or very low blood sugars, and they have a greater risk to have a C-section as well as a neonatal intensive care unit admission. Can you think of a diet in which you can still have carbohydrate intolerance but never see high blood sugar levels? How about a diet without any carbs? That doesn't make sense unless there is another reason for carbohydrate intolerance. Remember, excess carbohydrates turn into fat, which can accumulate in muscle cells. It's called intramyocellular lipid. The fat inside muscles prevents insulin from doing its job. All calories in excess become fat, and you can also eat just fats to get fats. And when you can't eat, your medical doctor can give you fats intravenously as a part of total parenteral nutrition, TPN, which is well known to cause fatty liver, even though we have calculated exactly the nutrition that you need. MRI studies have shown that infusions of fats cause muscles to be insulin resistant because the muscle accumulates fat. Saturated fats cause a double whammy because it can impair the pancreas to secrete enough insulin in the presence of glucose. That's bad. Usually your pancreas responds to blood glucose to get it normal. Otherwise, glucose in high levels is toxic. So your pancreas wants to secrete enough insulin to override the resistance of your muscles. When it fails to do that, you have diabetes. It's been well known that for over a century that carbohydrate intolerance skyrockets when you eat high fat. However, most people are getting diabetes because they're eating a high fat and a high carbohydrate diet, the standard American diet. So that means you're eating fat and converting fat. So if you get rid of half the problem, your symptoms will improve. But you haven't really solved the problem, nor the disease that is still there. And this is one reason why I don't believe the ketogenic diet is healthy, despite the fact that it will reduce your blood sugars, improve your hemoglobin A1C level, and improve your fatty liver. Actually, you can achieve all those benefits from many different diets, including no diet at all, fasting, counting your calories, massively exercising, and even on a whole food, high carbohydrate and high fiber diet if these diets are all well designed. Number 7 is a grain with gluten, but it also has lignans, which are considered to be protective against cancers. They measured the urine of breast cancer survivors and found they had lower metabolites of lignans compared to those who did not have breast cancer. And kids who ate this grain, which is rye, had 50% less aggressive prostate cancers as adults. If you haven't heard, the first 2 decades of life are very important for many adult cancers. In Sweden, men with prostate cancer had more cancer dying off and lower PSA levels when they ate rye. You may wonder how I eat rye. Sometimes I just cook the grain whole and eat it like rice. And sometimes I'll make a rye cracker. Here's how I make the rye cracker. In a cup of plant milk, I put half a cup of ground flax seeds. That's the binder. Then I add half a cup of coarsely ground rye and I pour that in. I then put a total of half a cup of mixed nuts and seeds. And then I sprinkle maybe 10 different spices from whatever I have in my cupboard, from turmeric to garlic and whatever else I feel like eating. Flax seeds also are high in lignin. Then I mix the whole thing with a fork. I pour that batter on a baking sheet, spread thinly, and I bake it at 275 degrees for about an hour. Now, it's not going to be fluffy like bread. It's a cracker. But I actually don't want that fluffiness. Air increases surface area, which actually will increase how much starch I absorb and elevate my blood sugars. That's really the science of bread, and that's why it's hard to lose weight eating bakery items. Number 6 is a grain that's also easy to cook, and its name is confusing because it has the word wheat in it, but it is not related to wheat and it does not have any gluten. It is called buckwheat, which has unique fibers called phagopyridol and D-chiroinositol that have been shown to reduce blood pressure and blood cholesterol and reduce blood sugar after eating table sugar. It is also high in resistant starches that acts like fiber. Japanese soba noodles are made from buckwheat, which has a nutty taste and the texture of a cooked peanut. Number 5 is another grain that's pretty easy to cook, and they're really kind of fun to eat because they're tiny and round. And the best part about it is that it is high in resistant starch. This is millet. Millet and sorghum both have slower stomach emptying times, about 2 to 3 hours after eating it, just to begin digestion. And it reaches the halfway point at 5 hours, which helps to reduce your blood sugar spikes. And in 6 weeks after eating 3/4 of a cup of millet a day, people with diabetes can reverse their insulin resistance, lower their hemoglobin A1C levels, and cholesterol. Number 4 is a common grain that is served as a tea in Korean restaurants. It has a nutty flavor, and that is barley. But barley does have gluten, so if you're gluten sensitive, you should avoid barley. Did you know that the Roman gladiators were known as barley men? They literally analyzed the poop of Roman gladiators and found that they ate mostly barley, wheat, and vegetables. Barley is high in soluble fibers to reduce cholesterol, and they also contain lutein and zeaxanthin, important for cellular repair. Like other whole grains, barley is protective against blood sugar spikes. Number 3 is an ancient grain that is related to wheat called farro and has a texture of barley but is a little bit more chewy. It is a bit harder to cook, so it's good to pre-soak it. Farro is rich in proteins and antioxidants, and eaten whole can buffer blood sugars and reduce cholesterol, just like the other grains. Number 2 is another ancient gluten-free grain called amaranth. If you want manganese, I wouldn't take it as a supplement. Just 1 serving of amaranth, and you will get more than your daily needs. Number 1 is an ancient wheat grain called Kumat. Have you wondered why I keep listing ancient grains? Because ancient grains have more antioxidant pigments like lutein and zeaxanthin, which reduces more inflammation compared to wheat bleached white flours and grains used to make pastry, cakes, and bread. They even tested this on people with irritable bowel syndrome, and those placed on ancient grains had improved symptoms with less pain and improved stool quality. Ancient grains even improved liver inflammation with better blood sugar and blood cholesterol control, which translates into cleaner arteries. In my house, these are some of the grains I buy and eat, and it may seem like I cook every day and all day. Nope, that is far from the truth. I usually don't like to cook single grains, but instead I put a medley of grains into the pressure cooker, and sometimes I add goji berries and jujube dates to give it a sweet essence. Goji berries will give it more carotenoids that are so important for your brain and eyes. Dates also increase the growth of beneficial gut microbes. I also add white fungus to get the beta-glucans, which further stimulates my immunity. I make a large batch, freeze most of it so I can spread out the servings over a few weeks. I added plant-based milk to this concoction, and it will taste like the desserts you get in Chinese restaurants, only healthier. If you want to learn more about which foods to eat, check out the next video.